Hello and welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to this very, very special preview of Australia versus Pakistan. I'm your host, Behram Qazi, and I'm going to be talking to my good mate, Jarrod Kimber. How are you, Jarrod, and how does it feel to be back on grassroots cricket?
Excited to be back. I feel like actually, in some ways, you've been ignoring me, so it's nice I'm here now.
Yeah, well, I've got lots of fun stuff to talk to you about today. And Australia meet Pakistan at the Chinnaswamy Stadium in Bengaluru on Friday, October 20th. And just to, before we even get into any of the deeper conversation, how many catches do you think will be dropped on the day, Jared?
Well, I mean, if Australia play Afghanistan, we might break a record at the moment. So it's going to be fun.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And one thing that is on the mind of every Pakistan fan, I suppose, is that Pakistan's style of play in ODI cricket, it doesn't particularly involve going hard in the power play. They gradually build up their run rate, and when they're chasing, they calculate the game situation after every 10 over mark, right? That's how they kind of go about their business. And they don't quite capitalize in the power play, which is something that Australia have actually been doing. Not so much maybe at the World Cup, but definitely in the series versus South Africa before that. And the Chinnaswamy is supposed to be a belter. We know that from the IPL. So do you think that Pakistan, in order to defeat Australia, will have to outbat them? And if yes, what are the odds?
Well, I mean, the way Australia's been batting, I suppose it's not particularly that outlandish. I think if you were to ask me who is more likely to score 320, it's probably Pakistan out of the two teams. Maybe if it's more likely to make 350 or 375, it's Australia. Is that fair?
Hmm.
When you start to factor it in that way, I think Pakistan's biggest problem is going to be the fact that Australia is struggling against spin, and Shadab Khan is struggling with spin. And then, of course, you've got Nawaz, who's bowled fine, but probably not a flat pitch bowler. Like
Mm-hmm.
more of a, I mean, the irony is he's probably more of a fifth bowler, right? And now he's the fourth bowler, and so I think that will be the concern if you're trying to outbat them. Zampa Maxwell at the moment, which is Zampa's better than either of the two Pakistani spinners on current form. Maxwell might be up there, allows that. But Australia don't need that to work, right, as
Yeah.
much. Whereas Pakistan do need to take wickets if they are going to be perpetually, maybe under par is. I think that says it wrong, although that's exactly what we mean. Pakistan can make above what a decent team can make, right? But what they can't do is win the game probably with bat alone.
Mm-hmm.
And so if that's the case, you need to be able to take wickets. And you specifically, if Shaheen doesn't take wickets early on, or Hassan Ali as well, I suppose perhaps, it's really going to have to be, Harris, Nawaz and Shadab to take wickets in the middle. And only one of them has really looked like taking wickets in this tournament so far.
Yeah, it's interesting that you point that out, that Australia are one of the worst teams at playing spin, and Pakistan spinners aren't really performing to the levels that they are expected to. Do you think that is the area where the game would be won or lost?
Well, I just think I don't think there's a problem with Pakistan's style if their bowlers are taking wickets, right? Especially in one-day cricket. In T20 cricket, it's a bit different because you are trying to maximize each individual delivery, and so we can have proper discussions about where the Pakistan style works in T20 cricket. In one-day cricket, you are really trying to get that sort of 350, 320 to 360, let's say, score, and then you put a lot of pressure on the other team just by scoring that amount of runs. That's never not going to be a lot to chase, right? Like for all this talk about how 300's par and all, there's still we saw what was Pakistan's chase in against Sri Lanka, 355 was it?
345. World record in
Well,
World Cups.
it's not that big, right?
Hmm.
So suddenly you realize that actually, if you can score between 320 and 360, you give yourself a big chance. The problem for Pakistan is that Australia's bowlers are also quite good.
Yeah.
They might have a moment as well. If they have a moment, maybe that 320 that you're aiming for, or maybe the 340 you're aiming for ends up as 290, right? Your bowlers then have to take wickets. If you are not going to maximize your talent with the bat, what happens is your bowlers have to step up. And Pakistan is set up in T20 and one-day cricket for this. They are set up to make consistent totals, and then their bowlers put so much pressure on that you can win the majority of your games. Do either of us feel like, or does any Pakistani fan at the moment feel like this is a Pakistani attack that's going to consistently put pressure on teams. Doesn't mean they can't bowl Australia out cheap. Doesn't mean they can't do that a couple of times. But do we feel that they're going to put pressure on for the next 7 or so games? I don't think we really feel that, do we?
No, we definitely do not. In fact, I feel that if Pakistan are to make the semi-finals, they would have to really, really come up trumps with the bat. But you spoke about their bowling and how it hasn't looked at its incisive best. Well, Shaheen Afridi is a big piece of that puzzle, and he just hasn't looked the same, hasn't looked in rhythm at all. It seems like he's nursing something, a bit of an injury, or maybe he's not fully match fit. What have you made or assessed of Shaheen thus far at this World Cup?
Yeah, he looks like, I think he looks more like what people maybe thought he was when he first came in, which is a very good power play bowler who then doesn't have a lot of tricks further on. And look, his trick further on was the fact he could bowl 90 mile an hour left arm in an accurate way, right? Right. He doesn't have a killer slow ball. His slow ball's fine, but it's not his major skill. He's not one of those bowlers who outthinks you or outplans you or anything like that. Like a lot of what he does is just being better than other people, which is a good skill to have. Aim for that yourself. I will. And now it looks like he looks about 5 k's an hour slower to me at the moment. And that 5 k's an hour is everything. And if you want a perfect example of that, that's essentially what happened to Lockie Ferguson, right? We've been waiting for him to find that 5 kilometers an hour again. He's back at that extra 5 k's, and suddenly he looks like one of the best bowlers in the world. And 3 weeks ago, people were saying he shouldn't be in the squad.
Yeah, Lockie's got 6 wickets now in 2 games, and he's bouncing batters out, which is great to see. But coming back to the topic, we've obviously talked about Shaheen, but if you look at Australia's bowling, you mentioned they're very, very good, and they might have lost 2 games, but you're talking about the likes of Stark, who is like 1 behind Wasim and 2 behind Malinga, I believe, in the World Cup wicket tally. You've got Captain Pat Cummins, who also got some wickets versus Sri Lanka. Hazelwood's been decent this tournament, even versus India, he was good. And then Zampa's found form, right? He got a 4 for versus Sri Lanka. That is a very, very handy or more than handy 40 overs. I mean, you don't even need to worry about Maxwell too much, or Stoinis can help in, with that 5th or 6th bowler role. But yeah, those 4 bowlers who make up the majority of Australia's attack, they won't be easy on any surface.
No, I think early in the tournament, they were bowling very defensively, and I think they got a wake-up call, really, maybe against South Africa, because they actually bowled well against South Africa towards the end. And so what they did was they bowled very conventionally, almost very, 2015 one-day cricket of, well, we're not going to let them get too many runs, and then at the end, we're going to strangle them a little bit. They hadn't factored in that, especially since the 2 new balls have come into one-day cricket, you get more wickets at the top, and the other teams now attack, and most teams now attack with the ball, one way or another. If you have that available to you, you do it, right? And I don't think they were doing that. So what Pakistan is going up against is a team that is a little bit backs to the wall. Look, they were panicking. I think you know that. It was, they didn't know what to do after the first 2 losses.
Yeah.
And so they're basically, even 15, 20 overs, whatever it was, into the game against Sri Lanka, they didn't seem to know what to do. Since then, with bat and with ball, they have attacked. It's not even a full game, so it's not like there's some great form line there or anything, but it has changed. And Pat Cummins taking wickets and Adam Zampa taking wickets was really, really important. They'd been horrendous in the first part of the tournament. Stark and Hazel would have been fine. Stark had 1 really good spell, maybe 1 poorer game out of the first 2. And Glenn Maxwell, no one's hit him off the square yet. Glenn Maxwell has been absolutely impossible to get away, even from really good players of spin so far. So their 5th bowler that should have been their weakness was actually playing a blinder. And now the other bowlers have started to stand up. Stoinis didn't get a wicket against Sri Lanka, but in some ways it was his bouncer and the way that he was willing to attack and get hit for runs that almost set the template for what Australia should be doing. And so, look, they should be better than they are, and they probably will be. They know if they beat Pakistan, they're probably going to beat the Netherlands. So they'll go from 0-2 to 3-2. And in their mind, that is going to very much, this is a knockout game, isn't it? These 2 teams, essentially. I mean, maybe not 100%. One of them could still sneak in or whatever. But essentially, this is a knockout game. And I would say, with all due respect to Pakistan, that perhaps Australia is a slightly more suited to knockout games, especially when they're playing against Pakistan.
No, also not just more suited to knockout games playing versus Pakistan, but also the fact, I think, is, a lot of these Australian players, the vast majority of them, have played cricket in India, and there are a few in this team that have played for the Royal Challengers Bangalore, right? You've got Glenn Maxwell, Josh Hazelwood, Mitch Stark back in the day used to play for RCB as well. They know these conditions. Pakistan will know that there will be helpful conditions for batting and it'll be, a flat deck, whatever. But they might take some time to adjust. And Pakistan batters already take time to adjust. So do you think that Australia have a very big edge over there with respect to their IPL experience?
I think when pitches are in favor of certain kinds of bowling or have tennis ball bounce or get more grip in the surface or whatever it may be, I think at that stage, it takes a little bit of time to adjust. I don't think it takes a lot of time to adjust to this is a really good batting pitch. I think the bigger issue for Pakistan will be if they bat within themselves on a wicket where you have to score 370 or 380. So I don't think that will be them taking too long to adjust. It's just that is not the right tactic, perhaps. And we have no idea how this wicket's going to play. You and I are just guessing. But if the wicket is the way that you just said, and they are knocking it around, and Mitch Marsh comes out and makes 120 off 70 balls, they're going to look like idiots, right? So I don't think that's a time to adjust thing. I think that could be a concern on this kind of wicket. But let's say they bat first and they make 350. Australia's still got to chase that. So even if they are under the mark, they'll give themselves a very good chance.
I do believe that Pakistan might fare better if they are chasing, because then the math for them will become easier and they'll know exactly what to do. Because if you look at Babar and Rizwan, they're not the quickest around the block, right? They're not particularly extreme fast-paced batters, but they've chased down 200 plus totals in T20. So, I think Pakistan might fare better if they're chasing 350 as opposed to, having the task to set 350 in the first innings.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at the history of limited overs cricket, Michael Bevan, MS Dhoni, those sorts of players, even Virat Kohli, although not recent Virat Kohli, but certainly back in his day, those players in the first innings are not as glorious as they are in the second innings. And it's not just that they're chasing the totals. In the second innings, they know exactly the speed they need to bat at.
Yeah.
Whereas in the first innings, they can bat too slow at times, right? It's not their fault. They just, they're looking at the tempo gauge and it's hard for them to check. That certainly follows and would make a lot of sense. So yeah, I can see what you're saying from that perspective. But conditions are probably going to dictate whether you bat first or bat second. I think there's been a lot of talk in this tournament about Afghanistan should have batted first and this team should have batted second and all this sort of stuff. And I'm like, but they're basically playing to when they think is going to be the best time for them to get a chance to win. You have to play to the conditions. And Afghanistan, maybe they beat New Zealand today, even when they got the toss wrong, just because in Afghanistan's case you had it was the drop catches that were probably more of a problem.
Yeah.
But the commentators are fixating on the fact that they should have batted first, but they were looking at it and they didn't want their bowlers to bowl second with the Dewey ball.
100%.
Right? And and again, there's so many factors when you're trying to do that sort of stuff. And it'll be the same for Pakistan. Even if you're right, Pakistan are going to have to make decisions based on what is best suiting them.
Yeah, I'm 100% with you on that one. Even if I was Hashmatullah Shahidi, I would have bowled first in Chennai because we saw, conditions get dewy later on and they would have wanted their spinners to have the best of conditions to do their thing. But anyway, I think we've spoken about conditions a lot. Let's talk about the occasion a bit. And we've both mentioned how, if not a knockout, this is a very important game for both teams, right? They win this and they amplify their chances of making it to the semi-final by a lot. And Australia have lost their first two fixtures, albeit against good opposition, whereas Pakistan has won their two fixtures against weaker opposition, with all due respect to the Netherlands and Sri Lanka. But Australia did fail to cross 200 in their first two outings in the World Cup. So is all of that good news for Pakistan, or is it terrible news? Because if Australia know that it's do or die, I don't know, they might come all guns blazing.
I think the game to play them was last game. Because they didn't have any confidence, and we saw the way they started against Sri Lanka. They started like a team who didn't have any confidence. If they were playing anyone better than Sri Lanka, they'd be out of the tournament now. Really believe that. Sri Lanka batted well at the start, but I think Australia played a huge part in that. And then, from then on in, obviously things changed dramatically in that game. That was the game that you wanted to play them if you're Pakistan, I think. I thought in 2021, which is not a good omen for Pakistan that I'm bringing this up, but I thought in the T20 in 2021, that after losing that early game and looking like they might be going home and everything else, They just started playing aggressive cricket, and it's very interesting. We've seen India have the opposite problem, right? So India get to these tournaments, play all this aggressive cricket. They get to the tournament and they clam up a little bit, and they start to get defensive. Australia, luckily for them, have had some moments where they've actually struggled at the start, which allows them to go, well, we're going to lose anyway. Let's play this way. And when Australia's playing like that, they're much more dangerous. And I don't know if Pakistan can play that way, right? Even though it's a must-win game for Pakistan, they've got a steady locomotion batting order, and then they've got maybe Haris Rauf or Shaheen with the new ball. Outside of that, I'm not sure they have the ability to rip through, whereas Australia are giving themselves lots of chances all the way through their batting order, and with the ball to be able to take quick chunks of wickets. It's a very different two teams coming in some ways. It's almost like 90s cricket in reverse. Pakistan is the team with all these dangerous players, but he's not maybe consistent. And Australia is the team that's very, very consistent, but maybe doesn't have the ceiling of Pakistan. And somehow these two roles have flipped for this World Cup. But that's how it feels to me looking at it.
Yeah, it's a very interesting phenomena of Australia starting slow in tournaments. We haven't seen an awful lot of it, but I guess 99 Steve Waugh is what comes to mind. And
99 and 2021 World T20. So they've done it twice and won a tournament. Not quite, neither time was it quite Champions Trophy 17 or World Cup 92. Right? They were a bit more dramatic when Pakistan did it. But I do think, so you got to remember, Australia don't plan for these World Cups, right? So they just turn up. And they think they've got enough talent. When they get there, they'll work it out. In some ways, losing early and in embarrassing ways early on is actually the best thing that can happen to them. Because I know this happened for a fact. They all had to sit down. They all had to talk about what was going wrong. They all had to talk about what other teams were doing. They all had to come up with their personal plans, their team plans, and everything else. They probably did more research after the second loss than they did before the tournament, right? And the worst thing you want in Australia, when you're playing Australia, is a smart, motivated, and attacking team. Those are the three things that is the hardest to play against in Australia. That should be what Pakistan is going up against. Doesn't take away any of the stuff I said before. That steadies the locomotion batting lineup of Pakistan, and I know they had the slip up against India, but there are going to be Pakistan fans who won't quite be happy with this. But that was a bit of a fluke collapse, right? It wasn't from unplayable deliveries, although there were some good balls bowled, obviously. It wasn't from reckless batting. It wasn't from comedy run-outs. It wasn't from panic. It was one of those collapses where afterwards you sit there as a writer and you go, how do I write this up? Because they really shouldn't have collapsed here. It doesn't make any sense that they collapsed here, right? If you compare that to some of the other collapses we've seen in this tournament where you just like, oh, no, they deserve to collapse. They played Bangladesh losing all their top order wickets against New Zealand. You're looking at that going, oh, no, they earned that. That was on them. The Pakistan one was a bit different. So, yes, it was one innings, and it just recently happened. But overall, I feel more confident with their ability to make those par totals over and over again than I do with Australia. But, to use a phrase that I think I'm inventing for cricket, Australia are playing a little bit more like corner tigers at the moment.
Now that one's going to hurt, right? Pakistan fans going to hear that and they're going to be, oh my God, why? We're supposed to be the corner tigers. But anyway, interestingly enough, you brought
cornered
Pakistan.
Wombats.
Yeah. Cornered wombats. Yeah, cornered koalas. Anyway, you spoke of Pakistan's batting. And of course, Mohammad Rizwan is the top scorer in the tournament. He's got 248 runs. He scored a match-winning 131, unbeaten versus Sri Lanka. And Abdullah Shafiq got a ton as well. But you see the likes of Imam, Babar, guys who have consistently scored runs for Pakistan in the top 6 years or so. They haven't really come out all guns blazing at all. Like Babar scored a 50 versus India, but we know he's much, much better than that, right? Do you think that, conditions and tournament situation considered, all those things, do you think they've got a good shot of finally coming good? Because the law of averages certainly suggests that they've got to come good at some point.
Yeah, I mean, it's a long tournament. It would surprise me if Imam doesn't make any runs in this tournament. Babar looked fine in the last innings. I wouldn't be worried about him at all. Shafiq looked really good in his 100, and I think Suraj Gill is good. And obviously, Rizwan's been making runs out of his butt. So, I've got no real worries with that top five at all. I think it's probably missing an attacking opener. It's probably missing Fakar being in form, if we're being honest. And perhaps it's missing players who can go into fifth and sixth gear a little bit,
Yeah.
right? So you would want Rizwan, Sword, or Baba, probably one of those three, to have that sort of what Owen Morgan used to do. You know, Owen Morgan would knock the ball around for ages, but then if he got to the death, he could absolutely tear your eyeballs out, right? It's not quite like that with the Pakistan team. And so, you know, if you're building your dream lineup, you want something like that, or you'd want Josh Butler at six. You know, with all due respect to Iftikhar, he's not quite Josh Butler.
Yeah, no, 100%. And I mean, we'll have to wait and see how they, bat or what sort of approach they have and how hard they go. But yeah, odds are that they're going to play the way they feel comfortable. And some interesting stuff about Australia that I've noticed is that, they've lost faith in Alex Carey, the keeper, and they've brought Josh Inglis in. He got a 50 versus Sri Lanka, but I don't know. I felt like Carey had been there, for some big moments and kind of had that exposure. He would have been my pick. Right. So what do you make of this?
He can't play spin.
Alex Carey.
He cannot play spin.
And you trust Josh Inglis to play spin.
Josh Inglis can play spin. I'm not sure Josh Inglis can play pace. If I was Pakistan, I'd be bringing Haris Rauf on very, very early on into his innings, which is weird for a boy from WA to be so good against spin and so bad against pace. But no, Alex Carey can't play pace. He gets confused by spin. Sorry, he gets confused by it. He's not a very good sweeper, and he's decided that sweeping is going to be his main shot. He's fine against it on wickets where you can trust the bounce and the spin. So in Australia, it's a different kind of playing spin, and in those conditions, he's fine. Even in England, perhaps, New Zealand, South Africa, those sorts of places. But where you can't trust it as much, and you have to rely on your wrist to strike, rotate, and everything else. He's very one-dimensional. I probably wouldn't have had Carey in the side ahead of Inglis to begin with.
Savage.
Even in 2021, I thought Inglis probably should have played. So I've been on that just because of the skills that he have. It's different to all the other skills of that Australian team.
Yeah.
And so I think Carey's a fine cricketer, but he's a limited fine cricketer. And I think he's played a couple of big innings that have got people's attention. But I think if you watch him enough, you realise he's fine, but he's not. He's more like a very good 90s wicketkeeper rather than a great modern day wicketkeeper. He's never going to average 40 or something and, be Quinton de Kock or anything like that. And, Inglis isn't very well known. Your point is valid in that you say that Inglis doesn't have the experience, and that's again Australia's fault. There's no reason for him not to have that experience. He's had plenty of chance to play him more by this stage, and then you come to a World Cup and Alex Carey, you're our keeper. No, sorry, after one game you're gone. I think that was a mistake. But no, I don't think that is a situation you have to worry about. Having said that, it'd be interesting to see how he goes against Haris Rauf if he's on less than 15 runs when Harris comes on for his spell.
Yeah, it will be very, very interesting. And maybe what Alex Carey needs is another dip in the Karachi pool. That helped him the first time. And also, I just remember...
Now I know why you like him. It's just so you can mention that again.
I always mention that. Never waste an opportunity. But also, we might even get to see Fakhr play actually in this game because Abdullah Shafiq has a fever and he's under quarantine or something. So that's also going. We don't know what will happen on Friday. Maybe he's recovered, maybe he hasn't. But anyway, I think that's enough on the analysis or preview or whatever of this game. I just want to recount some old duels between Pakistan and Australia with you in the World Cup because we've had some classics, right? And one of the first games that I ever watched as an avid cricket fan was 2003, Joburg, Andrew Simons, and oh my God, still gives me nightmares.
Yeah, I mean, that was kind of the game that changed his career, right?
Yeah.
Up until that point. I mean, that whole tournament, they weren't sure really. Well, up until that tournament, they really weren't sure whether they wanted Ian Harvey or Andrew Simons. And they'd been toying with Ian Harvey for years. And Harvey was a fantastic bat, but never made any runs. And they wanted the runs. They thought they could make up the fifth bowler. They really wanted the runs. And that innings of Simons was sort of the thing that freed him up. And, Ponting backed him completely there. That was a huge moment, I think, in his career and really changed it. It changed how we thought about him from that point forward.
Yeah, and I think Andrew Simons, I mean, rest in peace and all. He probably averages over 100 in World Cup cricket. So, absolute legend of Australian cricket, I'd say, especially when it comes to World Cup cricket. And also, just wanted to ask you, what's your first memory of Pakistan playing Australia in the World Cup? Because 87, Australia beat Pakistan in a semi. Okay. And then 92, Pakistan defeated Australia at the SCG, if I'm not wrong, in their home conditions. And Wasim took a couple of wickets or 3 wickets, something like that. They chased 220 or something. I can't quite remember. So those two games, and then I don't think you'd be around in 75 and 79 where they, won a game apiece. But yeah, which one of those two was it?
Yeah, 92. I remember that game because I think that was a bit like this game, wasn't it? That was like a de facto knockout game. Whoever won that was a chance of making the semi-finals, and whoever didn't was going home. I thought it was the WACA, not the SCG. I can't remember where it was now, but I remember it being a very important game for the kind of the future of Australian, not future of Australian cricket, but a future of Australia in that World Cup. And you got to remember that was also Australia's first time. Pakistan had already hosted a World Cup by that stage. Australia hadn't. It was a big deal. Australia was like the birthplace of one-day cricket, at least spiritually, with the coloured clothing and all that sort of stuff. And they'd also been really good at it. Yeah. With a very average team, they'd done very, very well. And then coming into that tournament, it just all fell apart, and they suddenly looked like everyone else had passed them. And clearly that wasn't the case, because they could have very easily won the next 4. So it wasn't quite that case. But at the time, it just was like, how is this not working? It doesn't make any sense. And Pakistan, of course, were about to go home. So it was a huge moment, and it was a really, really big game.
Yeah, I think it was the WACA. Maybe I was wrong over there. I think you're right.
I was just about to lean forward and look at it. I only know this because I did the podcast the other day. And because, again, you would think traditionally, it's funny, the WACA, when Australia got really good, the WACA was, you don't play Australia at the WACA. Forgetting that for many years, the West Indies absolutely dominated Australia at the WACA. And so would quite often the 2Ws when they would go there as well, right? Because Australia didn't have as many fast bowlers.
Yeah.
Australia had a lot of fast medium guys, and a lot of the other countries would turn up with fast bowling. So it's one of those things where perhaps people see that and go, Pakistan won at the WACA, and it's like, yeah, because they had the fast guy.
Yeah, I mean, I think Craig McDermott was their best bet.
He wasn't quite I mean, Craig McDermott in the 80s was, in fact, in 87, he was fast. But I think by the time they got there in 92, he just started to slow down. He certainly wasn't at Wasim's pace at that point.
Yeah, no, absolutely not. And it's interesting how whenever we think of Pakistan versus Australia, for some reason our brain always tells us that, Australia is dominant. But if you think about it, Australia went on this 30-whatever game run, and it was sandwiched between 2 Pakistani losses. The group game in 99, of course, they butchered Pakistan in the final, so let's not talk about that. I don't think our followers at grassroots cricket would appreciate that. But in 2011, a lot of people were backing that Australian team to defeat Pakistan, and they defeated them, and they chased down 170 odd with a lot of difficulty. I remember Pakistan struggled, but they got there. And in 2015, they gave them a good fight. Had Rahat Ali taken the catch, maybe results could have been different. In 2019, David Warner pretty much mutilated Pakistan. So it's an interesting history, isn't it? And I think that maybe that deserves a podcast on its own someday, because people just generally tend to think that Australia has completely dominated Pakistan, whereas Pakistan's got some good wins.
Yeah, I think the T20 World Cup in 2010, was it?
Oh, yeah, the Hussey World Cup, Hussey versus Ajmal, 2010.
Hussey Ajmal, and then the Wade one. Yeah, Wade Stoinis one. I think those ones are, when Pakistan win, they play really good cricket. When Australia win, it does tend to be a little bit more dramatic, since 92 onwards, of course. No, look, I think in Australia, we've always sort of Pakistan, especially through that 80s and 90s period, even into the early 2000s, as one of the other teams that kind of played one-day cricket the right way. So Australians didn't really ever think that way with South Africa, right? Obviously not with England, but West Indies and Pakistan were the two teams where, like, not only are they winning a lot, but they're playing a similar attacking kind of one-day cricket in their own way, looking for wickets and all that sort of stuff. So I think there's always been a healthy respect for that. I remember there was a period, I want to say in the 90s, might have been late 90s, when the Australian players would talk to the South Africans and go, "How do you beat this team all the time? We beat them in one game and they beat us in the next. We can't work out how to beat them, and you beat them all the time." So I do think there was a period when that rivalry was quite strong.
Mm-hmm.
And look, I don't know how much people who listen to this channel know about the history, but Imran Khan is a really important person in Australian cricket. The '92 World Cup. There's actually a comedy skit. I don't know if you even know about this.
I
There's
don't know
a comedy
about this.
skit it was Imran Khan in brownface, right? But the comedy skit was that like Imran Khan was like so famous that on a major Australian TV show you could do this because everyone knew who he was, and it was all about him. And the joke was, no matter what question you would ask him, he'd say, I want to make love to her like a cornered tiger. So he was talking about his womanizing. He had the brown face on. It was quite a random moment, not Australia's finest one, but it tells you how big Imran Khan was. You know, he played Shield cricket in Australia. He played Kerry Packer cricket in Australia. You could argue that was a big part of him getting really, really good. They won Test series in Australia in that period.
Did they? I don't think they did.
Didn't they win the one win during World Series cricket?
I don't think Pakistan ever won a Test series in Australia. Australia and South Africa are the two countries they haven't won a Test series in.
They won Tests in Australia during World Series cricket, though.
They won a Test.
Sarfraz 7 for 1.
Mm-hmm.
But again, Sarfraz, there aren't many. Do you know that's Stuart Clark's nickname?
Yes, that I knew. That's Stuart Clark.
Do you know what I mean? There's a lot of, you got to understand how little Australian cricket fans know about other cricket cultures, right?
Yeah.
And yet Pakistan has had many moments. India is still very popular in Australia, right? You know, because of that '92 World Cup, and Wasim's basically a Melbourne boy now, right?
Yeah.
Like, and completely embraced by that culture. And again, that has happened quite a few times in Pakistan. And I don't know, this is very random aside, but Sri Lanka, there's a lot of famous former Sri Lankan cricketers who live in Melbourne. They get incredible treatment by the Sri Lankan Melbourne community, which is about 40% of Melbourne. But they're not famous in the way that, Wasim is, or what about Abdul Qadir, who was like 55 years old and was brought to play club cricket in Melbourne? Do you know? So there's lots of little stories about that in Australia. So there is I think Australia has always respected the way that Pakistan has played its cricket. And there is a bit of a weird connection between those two in a way that, with all due respect, like Australian fans don't really care at all about South African cricket, right?
Yeah.
Even when South Africa's winning, they're like, well, this won't last. Whereas in Pakistan, they're like, they could win the whole thing.
Yeah, I know. A lot of fun anecdotes over there. So whoever stuck around till the end will have some fun stories to share with other people. And to your point, I think Waqar also lives in Australia permanently, and he just visits Pakistan.
He does it. Well, he lives in Australia, but he doesn't live in Melbourne, so I don't care.
Okay, fair enough. Yeah, of course, you're a Melbourne boy. But thank you so much for your time, Jarrod. I know we've gone like 13 minutes over, but it was a lot of fun talking all things Australia versus Pakistan with you. Quick prediction, who's winning?
That's a good question. I feel like, there's this thing in sport about betting motivation.
Mm-hmm.
So what you should bet on as much as anything is who's got the motivation in the next game. The problem with this one is it's a knockout for both teams.
Yeah.
And I don't think we know how good either side is, right? The only thing I would say is that I felt something happened at the end of that Sri Lanka game that made me see for at least a little, 60 or 70 overs that Australia was playing their best cricket. I don't know if I've seen Pakistan's best cricket yet. So at least I've seen a glimpse of it with Australia. So I'll go there, but it's not with any great certainty.
Yeah. I think mind says Australia for me, but heart always says Pakistan. So we'll see, what happens on Friday. But thank you so much for your time again. And thank you to everyone who tuned in. If you are into similar content, keep watching Grassroots Cricket. Stay tuned. We'll bring lots of similar content your way. That's all for today. Goodbye.